Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the Bleav network. Check out our Bleav and Astros with Mike Stanton and Bleav and Texans with Cecil Shorts. Lots of good shows on the Bleav network, some local stuff as well. Joining me is my co-host, Stephen Kerr, 65 plus years in sports journalism between the two of us. Later in the show, what major changes do the Texans need to make? But Stephen, just after we recorded and edited my Rockets conversation with Salman Ali yesterday, it kind of shocked me with the Jalen and Sengun signings. It's been so long since the Rockets had to deal with big rookie extensions. You forget it's a major deadline.
Well, and they just met the deadline, wasn't it? Wasn't it Monday? It was Monday that they had to get a deal done, or else. So,
they nearly missed the Sengun signing because trying to get it by the deadline. It was real close.
Oh, you mean like the Justin Verlander thing? They pulled an Astros there, I guess.
Oh yeah.
That was it was interesting that they got both deals done, Robert. I mean, I think we were pretty confident that the Sengun deal was going to be done. It was just a question of were they going to wait or were they going to just see what happens? But I think with Sengun, I was pretty confident with that. Jalen Green just wasn't so sure about, but the Rockets obviously believe, at least to some degree, that Jalen Green, it was not a fluke last March, that he really has put in the work, that he is going to be better. But the deal still was not what I would say a high risk, no reward deal for the Rockets. So yeah, it's interesting they got both deals done, but it just shows you the Rockets are committed to this core and they're going to stick with it come hell or high water.
Jalen Green signs for 3 years, $35 million per. The third year is a player option. I love this signing. If Jalen doesn't develop the next 2 to 3 years, you can trade his contract and use those Suns picks to move on. Stephen, you were just saying, they love these two guys. They're hedging their bets. This is what it does. And if he busts out as an all-star, he's a steal for 2 seasons. The only danger is if he breaks out, he won't sign the cheaper rookie max after those first 2 years, but he'll want a 1-year deal more likely, and then go to the veteran expensive max 2 years earlier than he would have. So basically, Stephen, it could be a steal for 2 years, but you either pay later or potentially lose him after that.
Yeah, that's right. Because both deals have player options in the final year. So, I guess Green could choose not to take the player option that third year. That's going to be the test. But it also means that if he doesn't pan out, the Rockets, they still could trade him. They could move him with that kind of salary. Now, I Bleav they'd only have to pay like 10% of his salary if they moved him the last year of the contract.
That's a trade kicker there.
It's a trade kicker, right? So I like both deals, and yes, there's risk for both. There's certainly a risk with Sengun, but the thing is, you've got him locked up longer. Short of just major injuries, like he becomes injury prone, like he got injured last year. I just feel like he is going to be the breakout player that the Rockets expect him to be, or continue to be the breakout player. Out of the class of 2021. He's by far the best offensive player in that group. So if he continues to make progress, gets even better on his three-point shooting, that's a no-brainer of a deal as far as the Rockets are concerned. And he's still leaving money on the table.
Yeah, I'll get to my Sengun thoughts in a second, but I feel as good as ever about Jalen not being a bust and that contract being an anchor, not a problem because of his work ethic that he showed last year, which we talked about. And over the summer, the work ethic that he showed there, because we started to see something with his three-point shot during preseason. We know he worked on that. He shot 43% during preseason. So I've got a feeling he may be turning that corner on one offensive concern. And that is the one offensive concern. If he turns that corner, he's really good offensively, Stephen. There's nothing he can't do.
You're absolutely right. And I was worried about any kind of a deal with Green too, because, as you said, I haven't seen enough of a sample size to convince me that he can consistently do that. But, the coaches see more than we do, Robert, in the fact that he put in the kind of work he did last year. I know we talk about that every year with players, how they work hard over the offseason. Well, in Jalen's case, he was working hard during the season to try to turn his game around, getting up early and putting in the kind of work during the season that a lot of players do during the offseason. So that shows you he is committed to getting better. We did have some questions about that until I guess we started finding out that sort of thing. So I feel better about the deal now, just for the fact that I think he is poised to turn a corner, and the Rockets coaches certainly think he is. It goes back to what I've said many times about Kelvin Sampson and the Cougars. I just have the confidence in Ime Udoka that he can get the most out of his players, and that includes Jalen Green.
Okay, so let's get to Sengun and the details there. Sengun signs for 5 years, $185 million, in exchange for taking less than the $224 million max. Sengun gets a 5th-year player option. Steven, I might love this deal more than Jalen, just because the only downside is losing 1 year of Sengun with that option. They basically traded a year and a player option for much less money. But the upside is they're saving about $8 million per year, the Rockets are, which is important flexibility. Plus, I Bleav Sengun is a better player right now than 4 players who've already gotten the full max: Evan Mobley, Franz Wagner, Cade Cunningham, and Scotty Barnes. 4 guys that we saw get the max this offseason.
In that same class. Yeah.
And they're much more of a hardcore, hey, you can build an offense around this guy than those 4 guys have shown to this point, Steven.
Yeah. And I mean, as you said, the way I think the Rockets are getting him at just the right time, or re-signing him, I should say, at just the right time when he's really starting to come into his own. This is the time to do it, Robert. You've got, at least 4 years, depending on what he does with the player option. So I think the deal is great there. Now, we talk about leaving money on the table, and listen, Sengun is not the only player. The teams are always in the better position with these kind of deals. I mean, that's just the way it is. And we can talk about, he may remember that, when the contract is up and, negotiating the next time. But look, if you want to play in a winning team, then sometimes you have to make those sacrifices. And later on, if you really want to test the free agent waters, you can decline the player option and do that. But if you're all about winning, which you should be in the first place, first and foremost, this is a deal that's still going to net you an average of $200 million after 9 years. That's not too shabby, Robert. This is not something that the Rockets have done and nobody else does. In this kind of situation, that's where these teams are. They hold the upper hand on these deals. And if you really want to stay in the system you're in and win, like the Rockets hopefully will, it's not like anybody's forcing you to take the deal, but why wouldn't you in this case?
Yeah, a couple of things. You were talking about the willingness of these guys to take, a deal down the road because, they're getting out early and it gives them options. And hey, the Rockets were quote unquote trying to lowball them or negotiate where these other guys are getting the max. Let me just point out, this is just going to be about the numbers and where things are. But the key is, if you have a guy that's been in the organization for a while and been in his city, I just feel like he's going to be less likely to leave. And so when you lock down
that's my point.
When you lock him down he's going to have been here for 9 years. I think Sengun will have been here for 9 years. But by the time this is a deal, and he said he wants to make Houston his home, Jalen Green, it'll be 6 years by that point. So, I think all of that stuff is going to play into them wanting to stay here. Now, does this hamper the Rockets' ability to keep the rest of their young core? Because I know a lot of people are worried about that. Well, Tari and Jabari, they're just role players at this point. I don't see a scenario where either one will deserve a max contract in a year or two. The most likely snafu for keeping the young core together, probably Ahmed Thompson. If he earns a max in 3 years, then the Rockets might be choosing between him and Jalen. Jalen will be at the last year of his deal by the time it kicks in. But go ahead and give me rich people's problems, Steven. If he's a max guy, great.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it. Give me the rich man's problems. And no, I certainly don't think Jabari Smith, either of those two guys deserves the max at this point. Jabari Smith needs to gain some confidence and definitely needs to improve his shooting. You can't, Robert, realistically, You can't give these kind of deals to everybody. But I think that you are committing yourself to the two main guys. These are the ones we've been talking about in Sengun and Green. You've committed to those two. Now you've got to continue to evolve and build around those two. There are going to be some sacrifices at some point, and that's just the way it is. Are you going to try to do something with Fred VanVleet if he's willing to take a similar discount and stay for the long term, which he's indicated that he does want to stay long term? Then all the better. Now, he's not a young player. I realize that, but you could still use a guy like that on your team to help the younger guys.
What I love most about these signings, though, is we don't have to stress about free agency next summer.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. I'm glad they did this now so that we don't have to talk about this during the season. All we have to talk about is their play on the court, and hopefully not too many injuries. You're going to have some, but yeah, it was just the right timing, right before the season starts. Now we can just take a deep breath, let it out, and talk about the season coming up.
Yeah, and then you're acting, Stephen, like it wasn't going to be like just before this. I mean, yeah, they could have done it a couple of months ago, but they can't do it once the season starts. So it's like,
no, they can't. But I'm just saying, it's just nice that we don't have to talk about it. It's
yeah.
over, and we don't have to think about it next offseason either.
Yeah, that's the other point I was going to make. And also, Jalen Sengun now have no reason to pout about their contracts during the season, even if you've been excited about giving the young core time to build chemistry. If that's the case, then you got to be happy about this. And it's all good news. I mean, I can nitpick about these contracts, but I just feel like it's all good news right now.
Well, it is. And obviously it will play out on the court. And I mean, the Rockets have made some deals in the past where we kind of scratched our heads sometimes even at the beginning and go, why did they do this? Or, there were times we thought it looked good. And then you look down the road and, gosh, why did they do that deal in the first place? They definitely wasted a lot of money on some of these guys. So we don't really know. But gosh, Robert, we have to feel confident, certainly about Sengun and hopefully about Jalen Green, that he really is going to turn the corner and be the kind of player that the Rockets need him to be.
We got some Texans griping in a second, but first, quick reminder to look for our live Texans postgame shows right after every game this year. Tom Chavaria and I break it all down Sunday, but keep an eye out Thursday for my preview with Colts insider Lawrence Owen. Please support our content by giving us a thumbs up, commenting, and subscribing for free on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. All right, Stephen, how do you fix the Texans O-line and pass protection? Do you got an idea, or you want me to go first? Because I got some.
Well, if you've got some, maybe I can play off of some of yours. I mean, I definitely have some thoughts on the offensive line and the play calling kind of combined. But the only thing I could say, if you're going to try to fix what you have now, is you're going to have to switch some guys around and hope that they can pan out in different places, because it puzzles me that you can't even figure out basic defensive stunts. And that's what you ran into on Sunday. It wasn't like the Packers were throwing this huge, complicated, complex defensive playbook at them.
The Packers had a pressure rate of 48% on only blitzing 17% of the time, which is just horrible. Like you said,
go.
It stunts. And, let me get to my first major piece of a potential fix. Kenyon Green is a bust. I've said it before. I'll say it again. It's time to admit it. Move on. Among his NFL peers, first in penalties, 6th in sacks allowed, and the worst rated interior offensive lineman, according to Pro Football Focus. And frankly, I don't need any of those figures to judge him. You can see it on film. I see it during game days. We've talked it over and over about how bad this O-line looks against stunts. And I'd say 80, 90% of the time, the issue's on the left side. It's either Juice and Kenyon or Tunsil and Kenyon.
Yeah.
The common denominator, Stephen, it's Kenyon. The common denominator is Kenyon. And if Caserio doesn't have a better option on the roster, then he's failed as a GM.
Well, that's my question, Robert. Who are you going to replace him with? Kendrick Green?
Sure. Why not?
I mean, he can't do worse, sure. But is it really going to be that much of an upgrade? I'm not so sure about that. But I guess, anything is better than nothing at this point.
Upgrading over the worst guy in the NFL, I would say he better be.
Yeah, well, that would be the option. I mean, that's the one that I was thinking of is Yeah, it's obvious it's for the left side. Tunsil may not necessarily be the top caliber all-pro he has been, but he certainly hasn't been bad. He can just get the penalties out of the way, and he's tended to do that the last couple of weeks. But yeah, the left guard is definitely an issue. Unfortunately, when you're in the middle of the season and you've got these issues, unless some miracle happens, you can find somebody off the bargain basement bin and bring him in. You're not going to have much luck, but yeah, why not try Kendrick Green in there?
You need to try somebody else before the trade deadline. And if not, then maybe you can consider that. But Kenyon Green is not the answer. End of story. I'm done. I'm going to move on to my number 2 piece in the issues. And it's what else? O-line communication. And I harped on this during the preseason. We made the point that O-line chemistry is the biggest factor in success for an offense. And I hated not having all the healthy starting offensive linemen play in the preseason. It was a missed opportunity. It's too late to correct it. So the other piece of communication is the center. Juice Scruggs might be more talented than Jared Patterson, but we didn't see these problems as much when Patterson played last year. Without knowing what's going on, and none of us really know, you can't say Scruggs is a part of the communication issue, Stephen, but it's something worth considering.
It is something worth considering. And I think that also goes back to the whole preseason issue of getting these guys more work together. And I'm not talking about just in practice, but I'm talking about in games. And, they've already reduced the number of preseason games, although the Texans actually played more preseason games this year because they were in the Hall of Fame game. So, you can't even say that. They didn't have the usual amount of preseason games that you now have. With it taking so much time for the offensive line to gel. I know part of it has been the injury situation over the last few years. You haven't had guys in long enough over a period of years to develop that kind of chemistry. But when you have that option, whether it's in the preseason or what have you, you've got to give them more action during that time of the year so that at least but I still think, Robert, it's just a talent issue all the way through with some of these guys, because we've been mixing and matching for the last couple of years and we're still talking about this issue.
Number 3, the offensive line catastrophe could be on Bobby Slowik's offensive design or O-line coach Chris Strausser's coaching. Slowik's going nowhere right now, so that sort of sets up Strausser as a potential fall guy. Maybe, but consider this. If he was the issue, Stephen, I would guess that Caserio would know better. He watched an offensive line mastermind for 20 years in New England. There was a guy named Dante Scarnecchia who retired 4 years ago that put together the dynasty Patriots O-line without much first-round talent, I might add. He protected Tom Brady for 6 Super Bowls with pretty much nameless guys in the trenches. So I would assume Caserio can recognize if Strausser is the issue. But I know he was kind of ran out of the Colts system, and they had no interest in bringing him back. Now, there was a coaching change anyways, but I don't know if that's a deal. But, they looked better last year under Strausser, and I just wonder did he get bad or is something else going on?
Here's my question to you, Robert, and I'm not discounting that some of Bobby Slowik's play calling, especially, toward the end of that Green Bay game, shouldn't be questioned. But here's my question to you. If the Texans offensive line is so inept, especially when it comes to pass blocking, that they can't even figure out basic stunts, how can Bobby Slowik get creative in his playbook to make it work? I mean, to me, it's kind of a catch-22 there is, some of the, he went away from the run when he probably should have stuck with the run a little more, and the passing game was ineffective, and I think you can blame a lot of that on Slowik, but with the pass protection as poor as it is, how is he going to be that creative? I think it's a matter of just making the right calls, but he can't really do a whole lot when his offensive line can't even figure out basic stunts and protect his quarterback.
Agreed to a degree, but I will also point out that, sometimes it's the offensive coordinator's job to put guys in the right spots. And now,
I agree with that. With the receivers, certainly, yes.
Yeah. Well, what I mean is right now, the Texans don't have a good blocking tight end. We know Dalton Schultz stinks at it. And then Cade Stover is a rookie that didn't have much experience. And that was the knock against him coming out of college. They lost Tegan Couturiano, I think he's around again, but they're not really using him much. When they did use him, I don't think his numbers were all that bad. But the problem is, like, he's not a threat as a guy to catch the ball. So, it's like you leave those guys in the wrong spots, or even Ogunbowale. I'm just not really thrilled with what I've seen from his pass blocking. If I'm honest with you, they've been using him all the time at third down, and Dameon Pierce came back, and they're not using Joe Mixon on third down situations for the most part. If that's the case, I would rather Dameon Pierce. He just seems like a tougher blocker, and I just am not super satisfied with Ogunbowale. I like him in the pass game on third down, but if he's got to stay in to block for any reason whatsoever, I don't necessarily think that's a good idea.
Well, I think what you're saying about Bobby Slowik putting players in the right spots, especially when you're talking about your backs and receivers, is true. And I would like to see Joe Mixon on a few more of those third down plays too. But, how do you get Tank Dell with 4 targets and 0 catches? Who's to blame for that? I say Bobby Slowik. And how many? I didn't see Stephon Diggs' numbers, but you put the two together, I think they only had like 28 yards. How's that happening?
Well, it's happening because the offensive line stunk, and it's also happening because Tank Dell dropped a touchdown pass.
Well, he did drop a pass. You're right. But I mean, what I'm saying is, I think it's a combination of the two things. I think it's a combination of that you have an inept offensive line, at least when it comes to pass blocking. I mean, Joe Mixon's a great running back, and he's doing a lot of it on his own. But the run blocking hasn't exactly been terrible because Joe Mixon has at least 3 100-yard games now. And he can also catch passes out of the backfield. That's another weapon you can use with Mixon. So I think it's a combination of both, Robert. And, the Texans are fortunate to be fine.
Yeah, I just want to jump in before you keep going, because you mentioned Tank Dell, and that just drives me nuts. All of a sudden, it's Bobby Slowik's fault because he can't get Tank Dell open when he was getting Tank Dell open all of last year. Maybe it's Tank Dell's fault. Can we at least put a little bit of blame on this guy? I mean, I know he got shot in the offseason. I know he had the injury or whatever, but he looks fine when he's out there. I don't feel like he's any slower. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but like Tank Dell, sometimes the players got to take the blame. It's not always the coach's fault with everything. And I was pointing the finger at Slowik because I was worried about guys he was putting in bad positions. He's not having Tank Dell block this year, which I hated, but that type of stuff.
That's a good thing.
But no, I don't think he's putting the receivers in bad spots. I don't think he's putting the tight ends in bad. I think this is the one big issue that they're having is they can't protect the main guy, the quarterback.
Yeah, and it's amazing, CJ Stroud, except for Sunday, when he had absolutely the worst game as far as passing yards he's had in his career. I think the only one he's had worse than that was against the Jets last December. He had 91 yards. I'm not saying it's all that Tank Dell can't take some of the blame. Sure. He's out there. He's running the routes. Slowik's not running the routes for him. And, the fact that he was only targeted 4 times, there may also be a sign that whether it's CJ Stroud, Slowik and the coaching staff is maybe losing a bit of confidence in Dell.
Well, he's targeted 4 times. He only had 21 attempts because they were scared to death of passing the ball because guess what? They weren't blocking.
Because they weren't blocking. And so I think it's just a combination of a lot of things. And
you can't get all of these guys 10 targets. Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, Dalton Schultz, Nico, everybody wants everybody to get 20 targets every single week, 10 targets. It's not going to happen. There's a bunch of guys, a bunch of mouths.
Well, it's not the amount of targets. I think it's what you do when you get those targets. And you're right. Tank Dell dropped a touchdown pass. He could have, that could have been the difference in the game right there. Now, Nico Collins is not here right now. So you do at least have potential to give guys more targets. But you've got an all-pro in Stephon Diggs, and he's not exactly lighting it up either. And Tank Dell, we thought that, if it hadn't been for the injury last year, who knows, whether he's suffering some of the effects of that and the shooting and just not being in the right place. Who's to say? But he's not being effective either. Dalton Schultz is not catching the type of passes he was catching last year. I mean, it's a collective thing, Robert. It's not just on one guy.
If I do have a big picture beef with Bobby Slowik, it's the snail-like pace of the offense. They take forever to get to the line. We harped on it in the post-game show because Stroud barely got off snaps on big third down plays twice in the Green Bay game. Both plays failed. And does anybody remember Stroud saying a couple of weeks ago they need to quicken up the pace? So, Stephen, I got real pissed when I heard D'Amico say it again Monday. This falls squarely on Slowik. I need Bobby Fastwick, not Slowik.
There you go. Good one, Robert. That's as good as my Damian not Dista piercing. It's Fastic. Love it. Yeah, I mean, I have to say you're right. And I've always said I don't like to rush because when I rush, I make mistakes. Well, I think a lot of the Texans' offensive mistakes, not all of them, obviously, but a number of them come if you have to rush up to the line and you got to call the play quickly. Guys don't have enough time to really get set. So I think there's definitely some truth to that. And CJ did allude to that, as you said, I think a couple of weeks ago. So I just feel, the coaching staff does have to take some of the blame on this. And you've played 7 games now. You shouldn't have to be rushing to the line of scrimmage with the play calling. That's something that should already have been dealt with.
Did we miss anything in the Texans stuff? Anything that you saw on Sunday that caught your attention?
Well, I mean, you certainly have to blame, I think, the Texans offense for the most part for the loss. I mean, I will say the defense played better than I thought it would when you had 5 defensive starters out. Yeah, there could have been a few things, on the last drive, Jordan Love could have been intercepted by Eric Murray, but the Texans did have some takeaways. So I don't think you can blame the defense fully for, the loss. And the reason that the Texans lost, I think it's squarely on the offense.
All right, let's move to some Astros because I had an Astros legend follow me on X this past week, and I'll give you a hint. He's a pitching legend. Steven, any idea?
He's a pitching legend. Well, is he current or active?
No, he is not a current.
He's not a current. Well, let's see.
Not Verlander.
It's not Verlander, so I'm going to guess Nolan Ryan.
Nah, I don't. Could you see Nolan being on Twitter
Probably
or X?
Not. How about Roy Oswalt?
There you go. That's the guy.
I was going to say if it wasn't Nolan Ryan, it has to be Roy Oswalt because Roy Oswalt does go on Twitter. Yeah, I don't see Nolan much on Twitter, but you never know. I don't follow him, so I don't know.
mean, Nolan's almost 80. I doubt that's like one of his. He's too busy making
farming
beef.
Yeah, making that beef. So yeah, Roy Oswalt followed you on X, huh?
Yeah, and you know what? He quote tweeted the Astros hire of Arizona third base coach Tony Perez-Chica. Royo called it a great move. Perez-Chica coached third base for the Diamondbacks the last 8 years, part of 22 years in their organization. His expertise was working with infielders. 3 of his players won Gold Gloves. And Steven, I also noted that Royo tweeted a few hours ago, and all it said was, in capital letters, by the way, bring back Bregman.
Well, Roy is wanting to bring back Bregman. And, what I like about Perez-Chica, with him working with the infielders, I mean, the Astros defense did have some shaky moments this year. And, you can point to Jeremy Pena, with some of those issues. And, of course, first base, I guess you can give a pass because we don't know who the Astros real first baseman is going to be. But I like the fact that the kind of experience that he brings, I think it's what the Astros need. And that's certainly no reflection on Gary Pettis. Gary Pettis was wonderful. We talked about him last week. But Perez-Chica is wonderful too. I think it's a good hire for the Astros, and it's probably going to be one of a few of the, I don't know if you say aesthetic changes, but certainly some of the minor changes you're talking about in reshaping the club this next year.
Versatility amongst the coaching staff is one of the things I'm sure they're looking at in that type of move. And, we got to have a longer Bregman conversation, but, and I'd rather talk about that down the road. So we're going to do that. But, I would rather do that than talk about this awful World Series matchup.
Yankees and Dodgers, boy, oh boy. The networks are loving that because they haven't had a series like that in ages. You've had the Astros or, the Rangers and the Diamondbacks and not the Capitals. I almost said Washington Capitals. It's because I cover hockey. Sorry. The Nationals. They've had a lot of these teams in the last few years. Yankees and Dodgers. So from my vantage point, I have hockey season to cover, so that's my excuse for probably not being able to watch the World Series, Robert. How about you? You got the Rockets starting, right?
I would rather poke needles in my eyes than watch this World Series. I would probably poke needles in my eyes rather than watching fans throw trash on the field. But I did want to ask you just one simple question. Quin Ewers or Arch Manning?
I mean, in that game, it didn't matter. But I think if you're talking about who is going to be the better quarterback, I think Arch Manning is. Quin Ewers, to me, is not a big-time quarterback. He just isn't. And I think that this bears it out. Steve Sarkisian had to pull him late in the first half as much for getting his head back in the game as for his offensive numbers, because he wasn't getting the job done. But he clearly looked lost out there, Robert. And at least, he did better when he put him into the second half. But yeah, Arch Manning, up until the Georgia game, he certainly hasn't played in a game like that. So yeah, he fumbled the ball, but he doesn't have a huge sample size. So I think everybody's just waiting for Arch Manning to step in and really show what he can do.
Can they afford one more loss in this new 12-team system?
Well, they only dropped to number 5, so I guess it would depend on who they lose to before that question. I mean, yeah, I think they can, but certainly no more than that. I thought they might drop, maybe to number 7 after the Georgia loss, but they only went to number 5 in the AP poll. But watch out for Vanderbilt. They're dangerous. They got to go to Vanderbilt, so it's going to be how can they respond to this loss. I think it's going to tell you a lot. But they've got some tough games. Arkansas. It's never a good time when you go to Arkansas. Then you have the A&M game. And yeah, I know A&M hasn't necessarily played a hugely tough schedule, but they'll be up for Texas. So yeah, it could be a risky thing if they lose one more game, Robert.
You don't have to tell me about Vandy. They nearly beat my Missouri Tigers. It took a missed easy field goal really in overtime for the Tigers to win that game. And then, of course, you saw what happened against Alabama. They looked good against Kentucky. They're good. I mean, it's not debatable. That's a good team. And I think the Aggies are pretty good. I mean, they just spanked Missouri. Not to say I'm super impressed with Missouri's team, but just the way they handled Missouri, it looked like a total mismatch out there, physically and everything. So I think they've got the manpower to really compete with Texas. I think that's going to be a dogfight. Just the fact that those two teams are playing for the first time in years, I think the anticipation is going to be where I just don't see this being an easy Texas win at all.
No, it's not going to be. And you're playing at A&M the fans are going to let them have it. I will say one thing about this Cougars football team, one positive, Robert. Just be glad they're not in the SEC. The Big 12, I think eventually they're going to turn things around, but it's just a rough look right now. And I'm just ready for Cougar basketball. That's all I can say. Bring it on.
Yeah, I was going to try to avoid the Cougars altogether. So
no, I was just trying to think of one positive. At least they're not in the SEC. They'd really be getting their butt kicked there.
Yeah, I had a tough one this last week. It's going to take some time, but just a quick reminder, if you're new to Houston Sports Talk, it's our 12th season, over 1,500 episodes, 300 guests. Check out our Houston Sports Talk History and Memories playlist on YouTube. We scroll that typically at the bottom of the screen to remind you, but just classic interviews and clips from our conversations with George Springer, Simone Biles, Calvin Murphy, J.R. Richard, Carlos Correa, Dan Pastorini, and even media legends like John McClain, Mark Vandermeer, Barry Warner, Mickey Herskowitz, Kenny Hand, and Dale Robertson. Over 200 videos that you can check out on that playlist.
And counting.
Yeah, so go look at that, and we'll see you again on Thursday with our Colts Insider to preview the Sunday's game. Take care.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.